I'd like to welcome everyone to our session. Can I have my first slide? So, our committee, the DEI committee, which we've adjusted the name a bit for political purposes, is going to have a panel on mothers and hand surgery. And we want to present them because it's a unique group of people that have navigated a course that's very difficult. So hopefully this will be an inspiring and instructional panel. I have no disclosures. We've changed the name just to augment it a little bit. So we've gone from DEI to IDEA. Integrity, diligence, excellence, and action. I think that's more profound, and I think it reflects the people up here because everyone has to navigate some tough waters to get to where they are. Currently, well, not currently, this is from a couple of years ago, we did a demographic study, and we found that about 30% of our membership is now female, which I suspect that number has gone up significantly. Looking around at the lectures, I think this is going up a lot. So we're going to have to do another survey to update this. But I predict that this is somewhere around 45 to maybe close to 50%. We've got 3 panelists to speak today. They're all very accomplished women. Dr. Rachel Hooper from Michigan, Dr. Wendy Chin, who's at Hopkins, and one of my old friends, Dr. Carrie Woodbury, who's the chief at West Virginia University. So without further ado, we'll start with Dr. Hooper.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Thank you all for being here. This is kind of a fun panel, and I really enjoyed putting together this talk, integrating motherhood and academic surgeon responsibilities. So in terms of objectives, I'm here to share my personal and professional journey, as well as share what has allowed me to integrate both of my roles. In terms of my personal journey, I'll be brief. I was born with a congenital ptosis of my right eye, and I had a frontalis sling surgery when I was 12 years old. I grew up in Queens, New York, and this is a Google satellite snapshot of my neighborhood currently. I met my husband, Kevin, in high school, and we began dating at the end of medical school and got married when I was a third-year general surgery resident. We had our son during my academic development time, Kevin, and he's now 10 years old. So in terms of personally, I'm many things. I've highlighted a few here, but I'm a mother, a wife, a daughter, a friend, and a fitness enthusiast. For those of you who went to the gym this morning, had an opportunity to experience that. Professionally, I went to high school at Christ the King. At that time, I thought I would be a basketball player. I quickly pivoted to becoming pre-med and went to Cornell. I went to medical school at Robert Wood Johnson in New Jersey and was fortunate enough to get my #1 match for general surgery residency at Columbia. As I shared earlier, I did some academic development time at Cornell and came back to finish my general surgery residency and graduated. I subsequently joined the University of Michigan plastic surgery program as a 4th-year resident as they were expanding their residency program during the time when I was applying. And then I stayed at the University of Michigan and did my hand fellowship. So needless to say, my personal and professional roles can oftentimes be competing. And some would even say they collide every now and again. I recently had a collision, if you will. This past Monday, I was on call and was planning to go to my son's basketball practice, and unfortunately got 2 hand traumas back to back, and then had to call in some reinforcements. In terms of how I make it work, I think first and foremost, I found a great partner. These are several photos of my husband, Kevin, and he has an equally demanding job, but he never makes me choose, and he's always there to support me, and I think that that's really important. We have our family and work calendars, as well as I have my Outlook calendar, of course, and I think this is really important that we plan and kind of act with intention, and I have my work schedule on our family calendar, We have both my husband and my work schedule on both calendars, and then we have my son's recreational activities. I've been fortunate enough to find my academic position at an institution that values family and has great leadership, and I have really supportive partners that allow me to make accommodations and fill in. I think one of the added bonuses of attending meetings like this is being able to do some work-related events with family. So this is, the picture on the left is a picture of my son and a couple of his friends who happen to be children of my friends. And this was a work-related event at the big house, and they were allowed to run up and down the field and throw footballs and play around. The picture on the right is my son 3 years ago when we attended this very meeting in Florida. Finally, I think what has allowed me to make this work is being able to accept help, and that comes from my mother-in-law and my mother. They were able to entertain my son when I'm away. Our office staff is really awesome. One day when school unexpectedly closed, I dressed my son up and brought him to clinic, and they were able to entertain him. And I have a really great core of friends who we really work together and help each other out when we're stuck in the OR, we can't do a pickup, and so forth. So in general, I think motherhood is so worth it, and I think it's my most important role, and I really relish it. And so from a take-home standpoint, I think it's important to find the right partner and synergize schedules as best as you can. Find a job where you share similar values with your boss and partners, and then accept help. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful talk. We're going to have questions at the end, but I am so privileged and delighted to introduce Dr. Chen, or Chendi, and she's here with Christian, so please welcome her.
Thanks so much. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then also some topics, because I think some of us here may be in a position to support trainees and colleagues, so that's kind of what my talk will be about. Forward. Oh, forward. These are my disclosures. And I want to start with first the importance of talking about things like this. So this was a little event that we put on virtually with some students. And basically it's virtual peer mentoring, mainly like surrounding, let's normalize the conversation about this and intentionally support each other. And so I got a bunch of friends and colleagues together, a lot of recognizable names here. And we talked about a lot of things that I think often people don't talk about. Interestingly, the room for partners and spouses was the most popular room. And we had a lot of people sign up, trainees, students, attendings, and we had a really high survey response rate. And every single thing that we looked for really changed a lot. So what do you know about our reproductive endocrinology, logistics, finances, what it's like to go through it emotionally, and how to plan your family? Logistics, emotional things, financial things. And this, I think, is amazing because in a less than 2-hour event, virtual, on a 4-point Thrive scale, people improved 1 to 2 points with just this free, very easy intervention that's very reproducible. And I think the comments that we got, basically the vulnerability that the attendings were willing to offer was a key part of the success of this event, which again can be very reproducible regionally. So I would say that my journey began when I had a more senior trainee really talk to me very frankly about how she was not permitted to have pregnancy in her training, and then was asked about what birth control she was using, and then subsequently 9 years of not being able to get pregnant. And so in residency and in fellowship, I froze my eggs twice, and I've been extremely open about talking about what that's like financially, emotionally. I was pregnant during my first few attending years. I was 5 months pregnant at the boards. I almost went to the OB/ER. There was no maternity leave where I was. I hadn't been on vacation for 3 years to support that. And I was geriatric, so I was 38. I got preeclampsia. And our first week was in the NICU, which is really weird to be pregnant and then not come home with your baby. This is the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most rewarding thing and the thing I'm most proud of. Similar to Dr. Hooper, it's like, what is your plan? So our parents are a little bit older because we are already older. And so at 5 months, a week before my CAQ exam, I spent 5 days in the hospital with bronchiolitis. You see the NG tube there. We almost went on much more positive pressure sort of ventilation. And I was like, well, I'm just going to take it, the CAQ, and see what happens. Since then, where I was working at an extremely busy level 1 trauma center, I kind of reprioritized myself. And when I give a particular resident talk, I show this because this is like 4:30 p.m. on a weekday, and we're doing some socialization, picking strawberries in the grocery store. And, you know, this doesn't happen all the time, but that it could happen now in my current job is a measure of my happiness. And I think part of that was learning how to say no, or being more intentional about what you choose and what you decide you're gonna just give up because you can't have it all. The last few slides are just some things that are available, resources. So this is an ASPS EdNet free virtual symposium that I put together during COVID. It's kind of like a similar version of what I talked about. So a lot of people just willing to talk about their experiences. And since then, I've started to give this talk, which covers, you know, how to analyze your particular insurance program. What is the fertility data specifically for plastic surgeons now versus 25 years ago? Infertility rate, elective abortion, the rate of miscarriage. How much do things cost if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty so that you can plan ahead for it? And understanding that the Surgeon General recently declared a mental health crisis for parents. And, you know, helping raise the awareness around breastfeeding, which is the least understood thing behind Viagra, behind tomatoes. People don't understand breastfeeding. It's not a natural miracle that happens. It takes work. How to arrange your leave, whether you are a trainee or as an attending, or if you're in private practice, like it's really hard to keep the lights on. And how other industries make it work and make it worth it in terms of, you know, viability. So people make their money back on providing good childcare because they don't lose good workers from a retention standpoint. It costs 6 figures to replace a surgeon. This is another talk that I give for residents because I think people care, the data shows that people really care now about these types of things. And this is the last thing that I think maybe we can all paradigm shift a little bit, is that being family conscious, and I like to use this word because it's not just women. Why shouldn't a man be sitting up here with a baby who started napping 3 minutes before this talk started and 30 minutes before I caught a poop? You know, like a man could easily be here doing this. Anybody could be here. It's not just moms. I think it's everybody. And then also that it is feasible because we are all smart, type A, creative people. And so creating a solution should not be out of reach for people like us. And that's it. Thank you. Oh.
Thanks, Dr. Chen, for a wonderful talk. All right, ready for Dr. Woodbury, anchor leg.
So thank you for the opportunity to talk today about my journey. I want to thank you all for inviting me to serve on the panel. And today we'll talk about my personal experiences as a mother in hand surgery. I have no disclosures. So in general, we'll go over the choices I made, childbirth experiences and childcare experiences, and then some of the challenges I faced. It started with medical school. My mentor, the late Dr. Levi Watkins, told me when I expressed my interest in surgery, you can't be a surgeon and have a family. That was a difficult message for me to hear as a medical student. I didn't have many women surgeons as role models, and I trusted and valued his opinion. As I contemplated that decision, I realized that my heart was in surgery, and I had to do it despite his advice, and I thought, I'm going to give it a try. I met my husband, Michael, when I was a third-year medical student, and it was during our interactions over the 6 to 7 years that I realized we shared common values, and more importantly, he had such a flexible work schedule as a pharmaceutical sales rep. I watched him plan and create his schedule. He would have half days off and go in late and come home early, and I thought, wow, that would be perfect for a surgeon to have as a husband. In terms of career choice, I knew that I enjoyed teaching and I was looking for an academic career. I interviewed at several locations, and St. Louis University was number one because it gave me an opportunity to be section chief of hand, to be involved in residency education, And more importantly, the location was close to my family in Nashville. It was 5 hours away, and my mother had cousins in St. Louis, so it was a no-brainer for me. However, as life became extremely busy, my husband and I, with 3 children, realized that we needed to make a pivot and a change. And so, after careful consideration, I moved back home to Nashville to be closer to family. There were no academic positions at Vanderbilt University, so I took a multi-specialty position at the Murfreesboro Medical Clinic. However, I had no idea that there was such a thing as a 4-day work week for a surgeon. And so I interviewed there, and they said all of our surgeons must take a day off per week. I thought, sign me up, this is perfect. And so I was there for about 4 years. It also gave me time in my schedule to go back and pursue my MBA, and I did that on the Fridays when I was off every week, in addition to Saturdays and Sundays. After doing that for 4 years, and life becoming even busier, I decided that I needed the autonomy that private practice would offer me, and so I created the McCorland Center for Plastic Surgery, named after my daughters, Michaela, Courtney, and Caitlin. I went into solo private practice, kept the 4-day work week, so I was off every Friday, and that gave me my me time. And then I was there for 11 years because my daughter, who was trying to get recruited for soccer, asked me not to move the family again in the midst of her recruitment process. Being back home in Nashville, I had the opportunity to be with my parents again, and you can see my siblings there, my brother and 2 sisters, along with my cousin, who was a live-in nanny for us while we were there. For childbirth, I had my daughter. I was pregnant while I was at Ohio State with Dr. Milton Armstrong here, and I delivered on June 30th, which, as you all know, is the last day of residency. So it was carefully planned, thinking that they can't fire me if I'm already gone. And so I had my 2nd child in July and my 3rd child in August. They were all born exactly 2 years and 1 month apart, and everything worked out really well. However, you all know the statistics about complications of pregnancy in women surgeons. And like many others, I had my share. I had a car accident when I was in my first trimester with my first daughter at Ohio State, and I was really worried about losing the baby, but I had to keep that to myself because at that time no one knew I was pregnant. And then secondly, with the 2nd child, I had preterm labor and I was placed on bed rest for a month before the pregnancy. And with the 3rd child, I had postpartum hemorrhage. The complications for Black women are significantly higher, with maternal mortality 3 times higher. And so I'm glad I didn't know that statistic when I was going through the pregnancy, that those factors alarmed me for my 3 daughters. In terms of childcare, my husband's aunt retired from her job in Connecticut, came to live with me in Philadelphia when I was doing my hand fellowship. I read Green's textbook of surgery to my daughter every night because I knew it was important for me to read and also to read to my child. So why not read Green's? In terms of a nanny, after my aunt left to go back to full retirement, we were stuck for a while and couldn't find a nanny. And luckily, this nanny fell from the sky. She literally called me one day and said, I heard you're looking. I was driving down the interstate in tears thinking, what are we going to do? Our nanny's leaving and we couldn't find anyone. Daycare was not an option, and the au pairs had too many work hour restrictions. And so she had heard about a position from her cousin who was visiting my grandfather down in the country in Tennessee. It was amazing. She fell from the sky. She was fantastic. She said, I want to live out of your home, but I'll come in at 4 or 5 in the morning, so it was great. In terms of challenges, my job transfer, my husband, when we moved from St. Louis to Nashville, my husband did not get a transfer with Eli Lilly Pharmaceuticals, so I was there for 3 years with just a nanny, my family, and that was difficult. He would drive back and forth 5 hours every weekend. From an educational standpoint, the teachers pulled me aside and said, we can't give your daughters what they need educationally. And so that's when I went into shift mom mode. I'll homeschool. So I homeschooled every evening after I got off work from 6 to 9, 1 hour with each daughter to give them and supplement what they needed for their educational demands. And then from an educational extracurricular standpoint, they were very busy with basketball, soccer, lacrosse, Girl Scout Gold Awards, and gymnastics and ballet. And then we also did piano and violin. And so with those multiplied by 3 Because of the daughters, we were extremely busy. It was like air traffic control. I had one child, my husband had one, and my father had the other. And then the illness that's unexpected. My daughter was diagnosed with an autoimmune illness which would hit suddenly. We would be in the hospital for a week, and so there were a lot of challenges with that. And then my dad's death 7 years after we moved there, which was really unexpected from bladder cancer. And so I'm so glad and grateful that we had that opportunity to spend with him. And so life happens, plan and know there will be the unexpected. And then I want to thank all of you and just say allow yourself grace and space when you're going through this journey. Thank you.
Well, those are great, innovative and inspiring talks. These are obviously very accomplished surgeons and mothers. We're going to give some time for questions from the audience. Please come up to the microphones and ask your questions. We're going to have about roughly 10 minutes or so to go through some questions.
Hi, I'm Ronit Wolstein from Alabama. And I don't have a question. My experience was very similar to Dr. Woodbury's. There was a time when we would transfer the kids from car to car in the middle of the day. So I just want to applaud you for two reasons. One, and you can see by the audience here, but I think it's much more important to teach ourselves how to get through this and how to deal with all these obstacles that you have on your way, rather than try to teach the general population to consider DEI or, IDEA or whatever it is. I think this is much more useful and makes a huge difference. That's one thing, and I really would like to applaud you. Just two sort of pearls that I have are that, and this is coming from a woman who did also like 300 things at the same time, is that take things as periods of time. So there were periods of time when the teachers in school thought that I was the nanny, and the nanny was the mother. But it passes, you have to get through these stages, do it the best you can, and then when you get to be my age, you have a family and you have a career. So that, like you said, be kind to yourself first of all, and give yourself breathing time. And know that there are periods of time where you'll be like, I remember myself sitting down and crying, saying I'm a crappy resident, I'm a crappy mother, I'm a crappy, just not doing it. But you get through it. You have to prioritize and you get through it. So that was just my 2 cents.
Thank you. More questions?
Dr. Chen, I was wondering, with the passion you have to get the word out about was it like a virtual symposium that you did? How did you go about finding other like-minded people, getting the word out, deploying the surveys, gathering the results? Like, how did you go about doing all that?
Yeah. So I'm very lucky that I've kind of my professional journey has been in all sorts of states and coasts and things like that, and meeting so many friends, like-minded friends, that I just kind of drew from those people. All the credit goes to the medical students from I think not so well-known medical school in California. It's their first few years of being a medical school, CUSM, and so they took a lot of initiative from the graphics, which was custom made, to the idea, and then we created the survey together. So tech support, all of that was them, and just directing the willingness of the faculty to participate in a very vulnerable way, and planting people in the rooms to ask questions and to keep the conversation going. And deployment, truthfully, I had a travel voucher from when I was not a mom through an adventure company, and that's what I put up for raffle because I knew I wasn't going to be doing that type of travel anymore. It was a $400 voucher, and I recently interviewed the recipient for residency. So, Yeah, I think a lot of like sort of grassroots and just sort of everybody had a passion for it. And that was, I think, the key for success. And we're trying to create a website to make it very democratic so you can deploy it easily from your own locale. So stay tuned.
Any questions? Well, I have a comment. Having been a program director for almost 20 years, I've had a number of women who've trained in plastic surgery under my guidance. And I found it very interesting that some of the male residents that I work with have been more flexible than I would have thought when women have to go out. And most of the trainees didn't take more than 2 or 3 weeks of the maternity leave. They would take their vacation time, come right back, but their colleagues actually stepped up to the plate, helped cover call, didn't complain. I was very proud of the folks that did that. So, and then the other thing that was important is to have accommodations for breastfeeding, for instance. You have to have a place to go pump, and we have to have a refrigerator for storage and that sort of thing. And also, in the middle of the case, you're doing a free flap or something, and the resident says, I gotta step out. You gotta be flexible enough to say, okay, go do what you gotta do, and not make snide remarks or anything like that. So I think it's important for program directors, especially male program directors, to understand that you have to be flexible and open-minded about the trainees. Got time for 2 more questions.
Agnes Dardis from Mystic, Connecticut. I don't have kids now, but I hope to in the future. And I was wondering, from a very specific standpoint from your experiences, is there any, obviously things can change during pregnancy, but do you have recommendations, did you stop operating at a certain point, or just do more easy cases for the last month, like peripheral nerve releases or something? Do you have recommendations as to what you found worked best for you with each pregnancy?
Great question. I don't think I'll have a great answer for you because I had my son during my academic development time when I was a general surgery resident. But during that time, when I was doing different basic science experiments and things like that, of course, it makes sense to modify, what you're doing based on how far you are in your pregnancy. One of the challenges that I had during that time was I was taking the train from Queens to Manhattan. And as I got further and further in my pregnancy, walking and sitting and the ebbs and flows of the train, I often got lightheaded. And so you could, extrapolate that to long operations and, some that are more laborious than others, really hard fractures, and, it's going to be uncomfortable with lead and size and so forth. So as best as you can, and that's where you're working and the accommodations of your partners and your boss comes into play.
So if you look at endurance, extreme athletics, the BMR that you obtain, let's say during an ultramarathon, if you average that out over 9 months, that's about how much the human body can sustain at that BMR and that duration. Does that make sense? So the longer the event, the lower the BMR, but pregnancy puts the human body at its limit. And so if you look at the data, plastic surgeons particularly actually get busier during their 3rd trimester. My assumption is because the data may include private practice surgeons that are trying to keep a certain pace until they deliver. And so they're actually not doing it safer. They're actually doing it more challenging. So I think that's important data to keep in mind given the complications that we have. So I did not slow down. I was walking 3 to 5 miles per day, rounding, operating, being on call. And I think that was not a great move because our first APGAR was 3, and then it was whatever it was, 8 or whatever. And there's a lot of guilt, I think, that goes into that. And when they took them to the NICU, they just take them. They didn't ask. And so that's always been something that's been on my mind.
Looking at the literature, the complication rate goes from about 25% for most women to about 50% for women surgeons. And some of that includes the time that you're on calls, more than 6 days a month, the number of hours you're working per week. And so if you look at some of those articles on complications for women surgeons, you will see a lot of information there that will give you guidelines about how we can change the needle.
And the amount of time spent working on your feet and operating, which luckily in hand surgery, rarely on your feet, let's say. And then if you're looking for guidelines to advocate for yourself through like breastfeeding, let's say I want these accommodations or what type of facilities, the AWS has an official statement as well as a group of anesthesiologists. And if you want a manifesto that I typed out with evidence-based, sort of like the JCAHO, whatever, like OSHA, and also infectious disease literature, you can message me and find me, because there was a nurse that took it upon herself to, say no gel nails, but also you can't pump with a willow, which is Bluetooth, inside my bra, inside my gown, inside my scrubs, under my lead. Somehow that was not sterile enough. So people can come after you, and if you want evidence, I can give it to you, because I did it.
Okay. I'd like to thank the panel for their contributions and their diligence, and I'll give them a round of applause, please. So we're going to move ahead to our guest speaker. It's Dr. Martina Kamaka. She's an associate professor in the Department of Native Hawaiian Health at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, the Johnny Burns School of Medicine. She's vice chair of the National Council of Asian Pacific Islander Physicians and founder and board member of the, I won't even try to pronounce this, Association of Native Hawaiian Physicians in the Pacific Region, Indigenous Doctors Congress. She's going to speak to us on a topic related to Native Hawaiian concerns. Dr. Kamaka also happens to be a Golden Domer. She graduated from the University of Notre Dame, and her team happens to be playing on Monday night against the Ohio State in National Football Championship. Dr. Kamaka.
Ho'oma lama lama o ka'akau kukui, kunihi o kona huanui, o ku kalahalea e mai nei, ua maila o ke kiova o, kai ka pa'akai o alia. Hali aloha o ka e hukai, maha maha ke kanaka I ka mauli o lai. Ho'opili, ho'omana, ho'omau, kalahui e. So, mahalo for inviting me to present here today. I just introduced myself to this Aina, this land upon which we are right now. I introduced myself to the ancestors of this land, and I told them who I was, where I came from, and what my purpose was. And that is a very indigenous way of introducing yourselves. I use that when I teach at the Johnny Burns School of Medicine, because for our patients, it's really all about trust. Do I trust you? And for us, especially here in Hawaii, it's like, who are you? Who's your family? Where are you from? Do I know if I can trust you that way? And so I put this picture up because these are the two places that I'm from. The first is my homeland. On the top, this is the Ahupua'a of Kaneohe. Ahupua'a is a traditional land division that goes from the mountain to the sea. And my ancestors divided up the island according to these land divisions because they wanted to make sure that everyone had access to resources. Whether you were a fisherman, you could trade with the farmers, and the farmers could trade with the medicine gatherers up in the mountain. So everyone had access to these resources. So I'm from the Ahupua'a of Kaneohe, up there on the island of Oahu. My mountain is Lanihuli, my waters are Kamo'oli'i. The rains of my Aina are the Apuakea rain, and the wind is the Ulumano. In the Oli that I just shared with you, it really had more to do with the Johnny Burns School of Medicine and the Aina that was from. And I was describing that land and the history of that land and the purpose of the medical school, which is really to heal the people. So I wanted to share with you, because probably no one's talked to you about this place you are, and I would like to acknowledge the ancestors of this place by introducing you to this place. This land division is called Waikoloa, so the same name as a result. The rain is the Uaha'au, and the wind is a sea breeze called Eka. There are a couple of really important features of this land. There's Anai Ho'omalu Beach, which is a little more toward the Marriott. I hope you guys make your way over there to check it out. There are two very famous fish ponds there, Ku'uali'i and Kahapapa fish ponds. The area is called Restricted Mullet, and these were the royal fish ponds. So it was kind of like the refrigerator. We raised our mullet, our fish, in these fish ponds so we could access them whether the weather was good or bad. There's some very there's native shrimp that live in there, in those fish ponds. It's brackish water. There's lava tubes that connect the ocean and springs, so that's that mix of water there. There's some petroglyphs near here. I'd love it if you guys got a chance to walk around and check it out. That is some art. Rock art would be a way of thinking. It's one of the ways that my ancestors expressed themselves in art. And there's a path all around the Big Island called Alaloa. It's now part of a national park, and there was a lot of ceremonies that had to do with walking around the island, particularly around the time of the New Year. So I originally wanted to spend a lot of time talking about Native Hawaiian health, but I'm going to deviate a little bit because of what's happening in our country right now. But I do want to start by talking about what did health look like for Native Hawaiians. So I talked about this land division that we had, and we had a very strict resource management system. So the people that lived at the top of the mountain, the water they drank, and the people that lived near the ocean, the water that they drank was the same quality and purity. Water was the most important resource for my people, and the word for wealth in Hawaiian is vai. The word for water is vai. So you can see the importance they put on water. And they had to make sure that these resources were available for future generations. We live in the most isolated landmass in the world here in Hawaii, and we have finite resources, and they did a great job of that. Their attitude was really that the land is chief and man is its servant. That's a totally different perspective than we have in our culture right now. So Native Hawaiian health really, if you look at the micro level, it's something we're all familiar with. It's that holistic balance of mind, body, spirit. But if you look at it at an indigenous perspective, you have to take it broader. And that actually recognizes that balance of that relationship with nature and the environment, with man, your community, not just you and your family, but your community, and then your higher powers. So all of those had to be in balance, as well as mind, body, spirit, to be healthy. So what happened to us? We became a very unhealthy people, and a lot of it had to do with the changes that came post-contact, what I call post-colonial Hawaiian history. A lot of it had to do with impacts of losses. The introduction of foreign diseases decreased our population by 85%. So within 100 years, 85% decrease. We lost our culture. A Western culture came in and said, you guys are backwards, you have evil practices, you don't know what you're doing, and they made us feel bad about this wonderful system that we had going, this resource management, all of that. It all fell apart in the name of private ownership, making money, making a profit. We lost our connection to land, we lost our sovereignty. You can see on here we lost a lot of things, subjected to a lot of racism, and this is what ends up in what we call intergenerational historical trauma. And that despair and self-destruction that happens with populations that are subjected to, that experience intergenerational historical trauma, results in health disparities. So when Cook landed, he was amazed at how healthy we were. He talked about how strong and tall our men were, and our women had good eyes and teeth. If you're into public health, you know that means that we physically very healthy. And now we have some of the worst health statistics in the state. So we are coming back. We are trying to recover our health. We went through a renaissance in the 70s, bringing back our language, art, cultural practices, traditional healing practices, and we're reconnecting to our land. We're doing a lot of getting families to land, getting school kids, getting our communities to understand how important land is. The word for land in Hawaiian is aina. Aina means that which feeds. But to a Hawaiian, it's not just what feeds you physically, it also feeds you spiritually and emotionally. And also our population is coming back too. So we're on the road to recovery, but now we're facing additional threats, not just our colonial history that we're having to deal with, we're actually facing threats from what's happening with climate. It's happening to all of us. I have to acknowledge what's happening in LA right now. It just breaks my heart having seen that happen to us here in Hawaii and Maui. And I have to talk about climate and health and us as healthcare providers and our role. So most of you know we have natural greenhouse effect. It's always been there. It's helped to keep our climate temperature stable in our world. What we've done as humans is we've increased that, we've enhanced that. We've made that blanket so much thicker that we cannot get rid of all the excess heat that's coming in because we've put all this extra CO2 and methane and nitrogen in our environment. So why does it matter? It matters because the temperature is increasing, and the temperature is increasing and it has cascading effects. This is affecting all our natural built and social systems that we rely on individually and through our connections to each other. In 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement said, okay, we're going to try to hold global warming at less than 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. We're in 2025, this is 5 years away. They realized very quickly that that was not the right number, that we needed to shoot for 1.5 degrees Celsius. And sadly, we have reached 1.5 degrees Celsius several times this year. Our own U.S. Department of Health and Human Services declares climate change the greatest public health challenge of the 21st century. So this is a great graphic from the CDC. I love it because it shows the impacts of climate change. So our rising temperatures, our rising sea levels, our more extreme weather, and then how it's impacting all these other things that you don't always think about. Increasing allergens, increasing vectors, environmental degradation, our food security, our water, severe weather, and it goes out further, sorry. I love this one. This was modified here in Hawaii, and what they added was that pink band, mental health impacts. Mental health impacts related to climate events is huge, and we're only starting to recognize it. Even in our youth, there's something called climate anxiety. My daughter was very angry about a year ago and said, "Mom, you guys are ruining the planet for us, and we're gonna have to figure out how to fix it." And you know, it's not fair. It's not fair to them, and they're right. But the youth is very aware of this. It's had huge impacts here in Hawaii. We've had coral reef bleaching and loss, which impacts our fisheries. We've had coastal erosion and beach loss. Sea level rise has hit the cesspool and septic systems, so some of the effluent is getting into our oceans. It's impacted our waters. We have drought, our agriculture, and it's impacting our cultural practices. We can't find our medicine plants in the same place anymore because of the way because of the weather changes. So I want to just show you one example of this cascading effects that I talked about earlier. So here in Hawaii, we have what's called trade winds. They're northeast trade winds, And the trade winds are what cools us, it brings our rain, and it keeps our air really clear. So when the volcano erupts, the northeast trade winds blow all the smoke to the south. So when we don't have the northeast trade winds, the winds come from the south, and we get all that fog from the volcano, even on my island. So the trade winds are very important. When my parents were building their house, when I was young, they situated the house so they could maximize the northeast trades, and that would keep the house cool, and we didn't need to have air conditioning. In fact, we never even thought about air conditioning until within the last 5 to 10 years, and now I've actually had to put air conditioning in the house. Since 1973, our trade winds have decreased by 28%. 81 days a year that we don't have trade winds that we used to have. So what does that mean? It means we have less rain. And if we have less rain, we have drought. And if we have less rain, we have decreased aquifers. And if we have less water in our aquifers, it affects our ability to access drinking water. We have water restrictions. If we have drought, we have decreased agriculture, we have wildfires, and we have food insecurity. So you can see this cascading effects that I talked about earlier. So let's study Hawaii a little bit more, since that's what I know. So let's look at the year 2023. So in February 2023, we had a normal rainy season, and you can see at the end of our rainy season, at the end of February, we were normal. There was no drought. In November of 2023, this is after the wildfires, you can see that most of our state is in drought, and in fact, there are parts of our state in severe drought. So this is the Big Island, and next to it is Maui. If you see, they have severe drought there. Okay, this is what's concerning. February of last year, at the end of our rainy season, our islands were still in drought. We were still dry. So our rainy season did not replenish like it usually does. So I wanted to look at Maui. So on August 9th, 2023, we had the Lahaina Maui wildfire. Maui, in May of 2023, was in no drought. But between May and August, it went through what we call a flash drought. And climate changes can be responsible for this. A flash drought is a rapidly increasing drought. It increases so rapidly and causes so much dryness that it literally sucks the moisture from the plants in the ground. So Maui was in a severe drought state. In fact, the data I saw on August 10th, the day after the fire, 83% of Maui was abnormally dry, moderate, under severe drought. So what is the case study? What contributed to the Maui fires? Lahaina was traditionally green and lush with lots of water. There was fish ponds. There were taro fields everywhere. Taro is grown usually in water. And there were huge ulu groves or breadfruit trees. Sugar came in. All of a sudden, privatization of land, have to make a profit. That whole colonization impacts really took a toll here. By the mid-1800s, they had diverted much of the water. You can see these huge pipes taking the water away from the mountain. And what did that do? It dried up our streams. It changed the vegetation. The forests started disappearing. Forests, we know, are needed for that whole evaporation, transpiration cycle to attract clouds and rain. The sugar industry ended in 1999, but the diverted water was not sent back to the streams, and farmers were not able to restart farming or our fish ponds. Instead, the water was sent to hotels, resorts, and luxury developments. So there was still a lot of undeveloped land when sugar left, and it was basically fallow land that was overrun by invasive grasses. These invasive grasses are very flammable. So that winter, we had a lot of rain. You could see we weren't in any drought at all at the end of our rainy season, and the grasses had a chance to grow really big and tall, and they were very lush. And then the drought hit. So now we have this severe drought, we have this flammable grasses, and we had something called a downslope windstorm, which is a very similar phenomenon to the Santa Ana winds. So we had a northern high-pressure system that messed up the trade winds, and it created this downslope windstorm that hit Lahaina. The sustained winds were about 80 miles an hour with gusts of 90 miles an hour. Okay, does this sound familiar? So what was the aftermath of Lahaina? One of the worst disasters as far as lives lost in the US. We lost over 100 people. We lost 2,000 structures, 2,000 acres burned, 12,000 residents were displaced, and now a year and a half later, they are still receiving housing assistance, they are still in temporary housing, they still need rent support from FEMA. The first 169, okay, we lost 2,000, 169 FEMA temporary housing units were first moved into in November, 2 months ago. That's what they looked like there on the bottom. The total damage for Lahaina alone was $10 billion. Okay, let's talk about LA. What's happening in LA? 22,000 structures, 40,000 acres, 88 to 90,000 residents displaced. They haven't had the same loss of life yet, and the fires aren't done, and hopefully they won't. They've lost 24, last I checked. If we in Lahaina, with those numbers, are still recovering, and our people are still not living in permanent housing, what does that mean for places like LA? And it's not just LA, there were wildfires on the East Coast this summer. These problems are coming and they're not gonna stop. Are we ready? Are we ready for this? So I wanna talk about some of the long-term impacts. I'm involved with the Maui West study. This is an NIH-supported study. It looks at both short and long-term health impacts. Now, the sad thing about this is it is NIH-funded, but it took forever to get money to fund this. As a country, we need to be much more mobile with our funding systems if we're going to be able to address these kind of problems that are coming for us. So, I want to just share some data from the first 679. There's almost 2,000 people in this study now. And they had a wide range of ages and ethnicities, really represented our population. And probably a little more immigrants and a little more Hispanics in that area than in most of Hawaii. So those that were exposed to the ash, debris, and smoke, 50% of them say 1 year later, my health is worse. My health is worse than it was before. I haven't recovered. I'm still having problems with my breathing, skin and eye irritations, headaches, fatigue, and dizziness. 74% have decreased household income. It was 20%. Most recently, it looks like 33% of them are still looking for work. 90% lack of permanent housing. I just showed you the temporary units that were set up in November. Food insecurity in 42% of them. 74% of them have hypertension. 60% poor respiratory health with abnormal spirometries. 40% of those actually show varying degrees of lung obstruction. Mental health is huge. 52% are depressed. I didn't put the anxiety, but almost 4.5% of them are considering suicide. Now, for Maui as a baseline, it's 1%, so you can see it's significantly higher. 40% of them still have difficulty accessing care. And I have to say, mental health is probably one of the most severe shortages we have of health professionals. Now, the Department of Health studied the ash several months after the fire, and they found elevated arsenic, lead, antimony, cobalt, and copper. So I'm just talking about the heavy metals. In our study participants, over 20% of them had elevations of these in their urine, as well as elevated nickel, chromium, and selenium. What does that mean? I don't. As a primary care physician, if a study participant came to me with these labs and said, "What do I do now?" Most of us have not been educated on what to do with this kind of exposure. How do I monitor? What organ systems do I need to worry about? Kidney, lung, heart. We do know that those that had elevated arsenic, they were the ones with the worst lung function. So that is one thing we did find. So what did we learn from the Maui West study? And I think it's something for all of us to keep in mind as we look at the impacts of climate going forward, the changes is after a disaster, health is not an immediate priority. People are more concerned about housing, job, and food. But that doesn't mean that we should be delaying addressing the health impacts, because as we're seeing now, there could be some really long-term adverse effects that we need to know about. We need to be able to assess these chronic exposures and know what it means. The other thing we learned from Maui is that community resources were much more trusted than federal agencies. So as soon as the fire hit, there were local organizations that galvanized. There were boats going over Lahaina with supplies. It was all local, community driven. And then the feds come in, FEMA and they're like, "Okay, we're here, we're the boss, you guys get out of the way, we're taking over." That didn't work very well at all. Not only was that extremely culturally incompetent, not culturally safe, not culturally humble, none of those things, but it also kept a lot of our local people from engaging with the federal government, even though their intentions were good. We also learned that we have to have better integration of data monitoring and support strategies. And the people that were impacted the worst were our vulnerable populations. They were our poor, our low-income people living paycheck to paycheck, the people that were immigrants that didn't have good insurance. These were the people that were impacted the most. And this is the same situation for climate in general. Climate impacts health disparate populations the most in all of its myriad of ways, from, if you remember those graphs that I showed you. And we have to be able to be prepared with that. These people didn't have insurance. They didn't have doctors, but some of these doctors weren't available to see them anyway because their clinics burnt down. We have to be ready to deal with that. And the other thing that happened is we overlooked our first responders. So our first responders were in there breathing the smoke, being exposed to ash, and then they were going home to their home communities and nobody was checking them to see what the impacts of that exposure was on their long-term health. And we also need to know that we have to have more mental health professionals available. As we look at sustainable and long-term solutions, I think we need to really build resilience within our communities. I think the whole idea of resilience hubs and communities is important. And communities know what they need, they know what their strengths are, they know what their resources are. We can't forget to be aware of health disparities and adverse impacts on those suffering from health disparities. And I think, and I shared with you Native Hawaiian culture early on, if we could pay attention to indigenous knowledge systems and the way that resources were managed, when we do our resiliency planning, I think that could help a lot. If Lahaina had water flowing, streams flowing, fish ponds, lo'ikalo, and breadfruit forests, I don't think Lahaina would have burned like it did. And we also really need to think about training the next generation in exposure medicine, disaster research. I know you all are surgeons, but in a disaster, you're going to be called upon to do everything that's needed. And so do you know what it means when these people are exposed to smoke and ashes as you're trying to take care of their breaks and their cuts and all the other trauma? So I think we all need to be educated in that. What can we personally do? Prepare our patients, our families, our communities. Talk to them. Are you ready for floods? Are you ready for heat? Do you know where to go? Do you have a place to go, a cooling place where you can go when the temperature gets too hot? Do you know if there's a wildfire? Do you know where to go? Who's going to come get you? Do you know what to do with your meds? Ask them to do behavior change. And I think as physicians, we're very powerful advocates. There are studies that have shown that physicians and healthcare providers, such as nurses, are the most trusted voices when it comes to climate impacts on health. Doesn't matter your political persuasion, we still are up there. So we have really important role to play in this. And we also need to be models ourselves. We need to be the change. And we need to think about this as we think about our youth, and the generations that follow us. And a lot of Indigenous people, we think in terms of 7 generations behind us. Malama aina, malama ikawai, malama honua. Take care of the land, take care of our waters, take care of the planet. Mahalo.
Thank you, Dr. Kamaka. Don't walk away, Dr. Kamaka. We've got something for you. We appreciate all the panelists and Dr. Kamaka as our guest speaker today. Hopefully this has been uplifting and informative for everyone in the audience. We won't have time for a lot of questions now because there's another session coming in after us, but we're going to want to honor Dr. Kamaka's efforts and her great talk today.